The date's been set for South Korea's 21st presidential election after President Yoon Suk-yeol was removed from office last week for his martial law declaration last December. It's an early election, meaning the race will be more intense, more compact than in regular election years. What will be the main issues put forward by each party, and what do voters want to see? We have our correspondent Oh Soo-young to discuss what will shape this snap election. Welcome, Soo-young.
Hi, Tammy. It's great to be here.
So, Soo-young, candidate registrations will take place next month, but we've already seen the most prominent figures emerge. Let's go over who they are and where they stand.
Sure, Tammy. So reading the polls, we have to begin with Lee Jae-myung, who is the clear front-runner. He's the Democratic Party's most influential figure and currently leads public polls with around 32% support. And of course, this varies from poll to poll. Few others have entered the race from the DP side, other than Gyeonggi-do Province Governor Kim Dong-yeon and former Gyeongsang-namdo Province Governor Kim Doo-kwon. Now, there have been calls for an open primary to make the selection process more transparent, but Yi appears to be unlikely to support that. While he hasn't officially been nominated, it's widely assumed that he is going to be, with party members under growing pressure to rally behind him. Meanwhile, the People Power Party is seeing a more crowded field. Former Labour Minister Kim Mun-soo, former Daegu Mayor Hong Jun-pyo, ex-party leader Han Dong-un and Seoul Mayor Oh Se-eun, they're all joining the race, with all declaring his candidacy this weekend. So where do these candidates currently stand? Well, Yi, of course, remains the strongest single candidate, but his support has actually plateaued at around 32 to 34%. Conservative candidates are well behind him, but it's worth noting that this might change once the PPP decides on a final candidate, according to experts. And while the race could be rather close, as DP holds only a slight edge with a 34% backing, it was actually on par with the PPP 2 weeks ago. Interestingly, support for a changing government dropped 3 percentage points from the previous week to 48%, while 37% now say that they prefer continuity.
Now, what kind of strategies are we seeing so far, Soo-young?
Well, Tammy, in an ideal presidential race and perhaps a normal election year, candidates would discuss economic and social policies and lay out their visions for the country. But this year, experts say the contest will be dominated by political narratives. Both major parties are framing the election as a referendum on the other. The DP is focusing on restoring democracy, accusing the Conservatives of enabling former President Yoon's martial law, or his insurrection, as they say. And meanwhile, the PPP is fueling the Lee Jae-myung phobia, appealing to voters who want anyone but the former DP leader, who faces 5 ongoing criminal cases. In effect, Koreans are being asked to cast a vote of judgment either against Yoon Suk-yeol's legacy or Lee Jae-myung's leadership. Still, both sides will need to present credible economic and foreign policy plans. Public anxiety over inflation, youth unemployment and housing insecurity, those factors remain high, and externally, US tariffs and trade uncertainty are further darkening the outlook. In response, both parties are expected to unveil pledges from boosting core tech industries to rental subsidies and startup investments. Also, leadership skill in terms of diplomacy will also be essential. Beyond North Korea issues, the next president must navigate turbulent global trade and geopolitical tensions.
Now, I have to ask, what kind of voting pattern might emerge this year, Soo-young?
Well, last time, swing voters had a strong influence on the outcome of the election. Now, that was clear with a razor-thin margin of 0.78% that handed former President Yoon Suk-yeol the presidency over Lee Jae-myung. Now, at the time, it was mostly men in their 20s and 30s. Experts say this time around, it's likely to be that very same demographic.
Voters in their 60s and older tend to support the PPP, and those in their 40s and 50s tend to support the DP. Those in their 60s and older make up about 33% of the total electorate, while people in their 40s and 50s make up around 37%. Since the turnout rate of those over 60 is high, the vote share of both sides ends up being similar. So ultimately, it's those in their 20s and 30s who will decide the outcome.
Then what is it that these voters are hoping to see?
Well, we saw following the impeachment of former President Park Geun-hye that Moon Jae-in came to power with the motto of, quote, removing deeply rooted evils, or simply put, an anti-corruption drive. In fact, President Yoon was the lead prosecutor at that time, driving some of those changes, and his own motto was to establish fairness and common sense. Now, of course, when he came to power 2.5 years in, that all crumbled with the fall of his administration, which the DP blame on Yoon's martial law, and the PPP blame on the DP's abuse of its legislative majority, which introduced 29 impeachments for government officials. So whichever side that voters stand on, it's clear that there's distrust surrounding the democratic institutions in this country, as well as the rule of law.
The spirit of our times demands the restoration of the rule of law and a return to fairness. Through the impeachment crisis of President Yoon, the rule of law was severely damaged. His administration was launched under the motto of fairness under law, but it ended up derailing midway. So I think the people, especially those in their 20s and 30s, will strongly express their desire for our society to return to fairness.
In the wake of the martial law crisis, both Conservative and Liberal candidates have floated constitutional reform as the way to curb presidential overreach, as well as prevent deadlock between branches of the state, such as the President and Parliament. Proposals range from introducing a 4-year presidential term to strengthening the role of the Prime Minister or expanding local government powers. Now, public support for reform seems to be at a record high, with around 65 to 7% saying that the 1987 Constitution needs to be updated. Now, National Assembly Speaker Woo Won-sik initially backed the push, but later backed down after Democratic Party leader Lee Jae-myung dismissed the idea, saying that it should be addressed after the election. Now, whether constitutional reform remains a major issue, therefore, is quite uncertain.
Although constitutional reform has been discussed every time a new administration has taken office, it has never been successfully achieved as the leader becomes passive. So I think whoever becomes president must push strongly for constitutional reform in the early days of their term. That, in my view, would be the first step toward true national unity.
There is clearly a need for governance to change to win back public trust. Soo-young, let's see if the candidates can offer such change. Thank you so much for coming in today.
Thanks for having me, Tammy.